Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Jessica Williams, and I'm the International Relations Manager for Family Source Consultants. And I am absolutely delighted today to be joined by Molly O'Brien, who is a partner at International Fertility Law Group. Thank you so much for joining us, Molly.
I am so happy to be here, Jessica. Thank you for having me.
Of
Um,
course.
Yay.
Well, Molly and I thought that today would be less of a Q&A as normal, but more of a conversation because we know that for international intended parents, there are so many legal considerations that you guys have questions, concerns, etc. So today we kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the main ones. And obviously, Molly, I'm sure will be very happy to, expound on everything and just share your wealth of knowledge.
Definitely.
So I think given the current circumstances that we find ourselves in the States, it would be disingenuous of us to start with anything else but the Roe v. Wade decision. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that you'd like to share, how it's going to impact surrogacy in the US. I mean, what do you think? It's a big decision.
I can definitely make a comment on that.
Okay.
It's really scary, and honestly, it's really sad. It's a decision that shocked a lot of us, and there's going to be a lot of ripples and waves and emotions surrounding it. There are the good news about it is that I don't think it's going to have a huge effect on what we do day to day.
Okay.
The decision is specifically related to termination of pregnancy issues. And the Supreme Court has basically said, hey, it's not up to us to decide, it's up to the states to decide. So that is what it is. My hope is that in the states that have trigger laws, which are laws that have a restriction on termination. I mean, every state has a restriction at some point, right? But that has what a normal person would consider an unreasonable restriction on termination of pregnancy. Those are the states that we really need to band together and work with the government to pass legislation that's a little bit more favorable. But as to our day-to-day fertility practices, I don't think that this decision does not affect that. For surrogates who need a termination of pregnancy, we all know that that's very unusual. It usually, we see maybe 1 or 2 cases a year. I don't know. How about you? Like, what do you guys usually see?
Again, it's incredibly rare because the vast majority of the vast majority of embryos which are used with surrogates are tested anyway, which just reduces the risk. So yeah, I don't even think it's 1 or 2 a year with us. I think it's even fewer than that.
Yeah. Well, this decision, the Dobbs decision, does not directly speak to any of the other rights, like the status of embryos, like testing on embryos, like IVF, and even same-sex marriage. The decision itself does not touch on those. There is a discussion of that in a opinion that was given by another judge that is not the presiding opinion. This decision does not affect those things. I think all of us are a little bit afraid that there might be future decisions that affect those things. And I think we should be on our guard about that. But this decision does not affect those things. So I think we're okay in this industry with this issue as it is.
And that kind of brings me on to another question. But in terms of the states that international intended parents that are good for them to work in. Obviously, it depends a little bit on what their own position is. But how will this impact, the decision on which state to work in going forward? Should it be a consideration for intended parents who want to have the choice?
I think it should be something the parents consent to, for sure. Like, they need to speak to an attorney in the United States who says, this is what's going on in that state. Are you comfortable with that? And then they should be able to select or not select a surrogate based on their comfort level. Because I can totally see where an intended parent might be matched with a surrogate who's in a state that has a very restrictive law. And they're like, that's okay. We love the surrogate. We're willing to take that risk. And that should be their choice to make. So I think as long as we give them the information, they should be able to decide.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of then drawing back from what, is a new landscape for us and kind of back into the more safe legal territory in terms of looking at states. A lot of international parents automatically know California as a great place to do surrogacy, and that's where you're located. So obviously, California has incredible laws that make it really relatively easy for anybody who needs to use a surrogate to do it there, to do it legally and safely. But obviously that comes also with more people want to do surrogacy in California. So for international intended parents who are very focused on California, what advice would you give them? Are there other states which could be good for them as well? Should they be broadening their horizons?
I mean, definitely. And again, this is comfort level. There are lots of states where you can still do exactly what you need to do, depending on what your needs are of your home country, that are totally appropriate, and where surrogacy is done regularly, where you would be in a safe legal environment and things would be totally fine. A lot of times, what I like to tell parents is, let's look at the candidate. Let's see if you find your dream surrogate and she's in a state that's not California, even though that's what your preference was. Let's take a look, because maybe she's so awesome that you're willing to accept what the process is in the state where she lives. And again, that should just be something they get the information about and they get to decide. I hate to see parents limiting themselves unnecessarily. They have a very complicated process they're going to have to go through. Like if they're using donor eggs, donor sperm, and they live in a country where they're going to need certain things, there might be a preference towards a certain number of states, and we might want to limit it that way. But if it's pretty standard process, standard operating procedure, if you will, it's not necessarily limiting. Let's not do that. Let's give them all the choices and they can decide to accept or reject the surrogates based upon how they feel.
Okay. That's great. So what are those things that an intended parent should be taking into consideration?
That's such a good question. So there's a lot of things, right? So with their own case, they should definitely speak to an attorney in their home country, because in order to get recognized in the United States as parents is one thing, and that's the part that we can handle as the lawyers, but they're going to need somebody with boots on the ground back home to make sure that whatever we do in the United States coincides with and works with the process that they need to do there. Because sometimes that's going to mean things like putting a surrogate on a birth certificate. Even though she may not have any parental rights in the United States, her name can appear on birth certificate forms ceremoniously, if you will, to allow the parents to get what they need done in their home country. Sometimes it might mean only putting one parent on the birth certificate at first and then adding a second parent later. There's all kinds of different amalgamations of things that we might have to do depending on the home country. So it's crucial that parents speak to an attorney in their home country from the beginning.
Okay,
and so
you would recommend, even before they start the process, get in
Yep.
touch with the lawyer from their home country.
Right. And if they need a referral to an attorney, I know that our firm or whoever they're working with in the United States can absolutely refer to them to somebody in their home country they can talk to, so that everybody's working as a team together and they're set up for success from the beginning.
So if we have intended parents who, hopefully any intended parent who's watching this webinar will be doing it at the beginning of their journey and will take your advice wholeheartedly and contact that lawyer from the get-go. But is it still possible, if they're in the middle of their journey and haven't spoken to a lawyer in their home country, is it possible to do things almost retrospectively? I mean, how obviously challenging, but
it can be challenging to do it that way, but we've certainly had to play cleanup on cases like that before. I know if it's a client who's working with us from the beginning, we're advising them and giving them a referral to their an attorney in their home country from the day we do the consult. But we do whatever we can to work as a team, because everybody has the same common goal here, and that's that the parents get home, that they get home safely, and they get recognized to be the parents of their child or children. So everybody's going to work towards that goal, doing whatever we can.
So one of the common concerns that we often hear from international intended parents, and I'm sure it's very similar to you, is, how can we be sure that the surrogate is not going to have any claim to our baby. And particularly with what you just said, in terms of some countries, you actually need to have the surrogate on ceremoniously on a birth certificate. How can you just explain a little bit more how that works and how we can, even in those cases, ensure the parental rights of the intended parents from the get-go?
Yeah, I have two answers to that one.
Okay,
one is like kind of legal and one is more emotional. As you probably know, I used to work at a surrogacy agency long ago before I became an attorney. And so I saw this kind of stuff where parents were like, well, how do we know? How can we trust her? Because it's like speed dating, right? You meet somebody, you become pregnant, and before you know it, you're having a baby together, and you just don't know each other all that well. There's no history, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I was an intended parent. That's how I came to this. And that was my biggest concern as well. How do I know your surrogate, you're putting an enormous amount of faith and trust in somebody to carry your baby. And that's the last thing you want to be worried about. So I completely understand it, because that was my fear too.
Well, that's exactly why they've got you. Is because the agency can help explain, what the surrogate's motivations are. They can talk to the surrogate about the motivations too. But a properly screened surrogate, she doesn't want the parent's baby. She can have her own children. That's what makes her a good surrogate, is the fact that she can become pregnant easily and carry a child to term. She does not want that. She wants to help the parents. And for every surrogate that I've ever dealt with, the end goal is the joy in the parent's face when she finally gets to see them holding their baby, when she finally gets them to that place. And that's what the surrogate's in it for. It's not, she does not want to keep their baby. It's, it's not her baby. So that's my emotional answer. But then there's the legal one. And depending on the state where the surrogate lives or the state law that's going to apply to the surrogacy case, a lot of states actually make the contract kind of the basis of the parental rights establishment. Like in California, a properly drafted contract says that the parents are the parents and the surrogate's not the parent. We still have the other affirmatory court paperwork process where the court looks at the contract and says, yes, that's correct. And the parental rights are actually, they culminate upon the birth. But that's, the legal should do that. And if there is a state where the parents are trying to do surrogacy, where the law, there isn't a law, but surrogacy is still practiced because it's not prohibited, or if there's a law that has certain steps, that's something we talk about to the parents at the time that they're proceeding with this, so that they know what to expect and they know if they're comfortable with that or not. A lot of parents are like willing to accept certain things because they love that surrogate candidate. So it just kind of depends on those kind of things.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, again, that was very much the situation. We worked with a wonderful surrogate in Arizona where.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect example.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. So was your clinic located in like Nevada or California?
It was in Chicago, in Illinois.
Oh, okay. All right.
So we actually had an Illinois contract drawn up with an Illinois lawyer. But obviously our surrogate was in Arizona. So yeah. We ended up feeling comfortable and adored our surrogate. So for us, it was very much about putting that trust in somebody that we had built that relationship with.
Exactly right. Yeah.
But knowing that there was that legal framework, even if it was interstate.
Yes. That there's some sort of safety net to catch you, some sort of backup plan. And for the people at home, Arizona is a state that actually has an anti-surrogacy law. Like it says no compensated surrogacy, but they will take a court order from another state. So you have to clear it with the state first. You have to clear it with vital records. There's certain steps you have to take from the beginning to make it work. But Arizona is actually a pretty friendly state, all things considered, especially for a state that has a law in place that is like, hey, not here, but we'll take somebody else's, which is kind of cool. Yeah.
And it's also one of those states, kind of as we were talking about before, where it very much depends on your circumstances, doesn't it? So it's, we knew that for our circumstances, even though there was this book, the precedent as well was that they would accept us, but if our circumstances had been different. So again, it's why it's really important to speak to a lawyer from the outset. Now, you started mentioning kind of the, when your baby is born, the legal process that happens in order to make sure that that kind of final step, that intended parents are
Yeah.
the legal parents. Can you talk us through a little bit about how that works? A lot of people have heard the terms pre-birth order, post-birth order floating around, but it would be great to have, kind of your clear
Definitely.
definition of
that. Sure. And we should talk about the differences of those as well as administrative procedures.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
With intended parents who live in other countries, a lot of times they're going to need an actual court order that names them as the parents. So again, this is one of those other reasons why it's really crucial they speak to an attorney in their home country. Because if their surrogate lives in a state that has the option of an administrative procedure or a court order, or only has an administrative procedure, they need to know if that's going to be okay in their home country. So administrative procedure means you don't go to court and get a court order, but the parents, by virtue of the hospital looking at the contract or something similar, are able to get their names on a birth certificate. So they have the same end game as a birth certificate with their names on it, or a way to do it, but they don't get the court order. And skipping that step could be a problem. And it usually is a problem for a lot of these home countries. So checking with a home country attorney is crucial. So that's administrative procedures. Very few states do those. Most states have a court process.
Okay. Do out of curiosity, do any states, you said that some states only have an administrative process. What states are those, out of curiosity?
Well, Illinois has both. Illinois, you can do it admin or both. It's certain counties in certain states too. I don't really want to bog people down too much with like, oh, this county in this state. But that's just definitely something they should talk to an attorney about. Most states are going to have the court paperwork process, and most of those states are going to be pre-birth order states. So pre-birth order means you get the court order done prior to the birth, or it can be done prior to the birth of the child. Some states are post-birth order states, which is where you get your court order after the birth of the child. And some of them have both. Like Florida is one of those states that requires a pre-birth and a post-birth. So it's just kind of knowing the different rules in the different states, and just being prepared for that, and the parents being presented with that information from the beginning so they know the process and they can decide if that's comfortable for them or not. Now, post-birth orders typically does mean that the parents will have to spend a little bit more time in the United States after the birth while we get all that paperwork done, because oftentimes you can't get your birth certificate until that post-birth order is done. And then birth certificates take time, and then passports after birth certificates and so forth. So that is a timeline issue. So a lot of parents do tend to prefer a pre-birth order state because of that. But a lot of these states can do it pretty quickly. So again, it's something they should talk to an attorney about, learn what the timeline is, and decide if that's agreeable to them.
Okay. And do parents need to actually be there in person for these orders to be issued by a judge?
That's a super question. Most states will decide everything just on the papers. They don't require any attorneys. They don't require any parties to appear in person. Some states will require the parties to have their attorneys make a brief appearance. Sometimes, especially lately with COVID, some courts have been fine with us doing it over Zoom or just doing a telephone call into the court. And there are a very small handful of states that do require an in-person hearing. And those are like very, very, very rare. If there is something very unique or special about the case, any court in any state can ask for a hearing. So I've had that come up with intended parents who perhaps maybe have a background check with a ding on it. Obviously, if it's got something to do with child welfare, there's a separate issue. But if it's not dealing with that, the court might want to speak to the parents about, hey, can we talk about this DUI? We just want to make sure that you've been in treatment and that before we give you custody and things like that. So there might be special circumstances where the parents have to do it, but generally speaking, they should not expect to have to do a court hearing in almost every jurisdiction.
Okay. And that's the same for both pre and post-birth orders.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. And then once obviously the length of time, to get those orders will vary depending whether it's pre-birth or post-birth. But in terms of the process of then getting all the paperwork sorted so that they can travel home with their babies, can you talk us through that a little bit?
Sure. That's really my favorite part of the process, to be honest with you, because that's like the exciting time. We're getting a bunch of baby pictures in. Parents are, finally holding their child, and they're so thrilled. Birth certificates are the first document that parents need. Your basically looking at about somewhere between 2 days and 5 weeks to get a birth certificate. And that's just really going to vary depending on where. Even within the state of California, it's usually 2 days to 2 weeks.
Oh gosh,
So
really?
yeah, it just depends on where. So
Okay.
that's the first document. Once you've got that, then you can do the US passport. Just a note for all the parents that are listening, the US passport will be the document you want to travel home on. You pretty much across the board, no matter where you live, don't want to start registering your child in your home country, doing anything until you've returned home safely, you're settled, and then you have your attorney back home working with you on that. The US passport is actually pretty quick because it's a federal government document. I would estimate if you pay for an expedited passport, you can get one in about 2 to 5 days. Okay. And I definitely recommend an expediting service to help with those. And then
oh, sorry, Molly. I was just going to quickly ask, do you have to be there do you have to be somewhere in person for an expedited process?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, you will have an appointment at a passport acceptance facility, but those are all regional. So you, for the most part, you won't have to travel for that. It came up a little bit with COVID where the only appointments for passport things parents did have to travel for, but that's a pretty unique circumstance. Generally speaking, there should be something somewhat local to where you'll be. So first document, birth certificate, second document, passport, and the third thing they need to go home is just medical approval for the baby to fly. Everything else can pretty much get handled once they've returned home. And then sometimes we're still getting documents here for them in the United States and sending them to the home country once they've returned home.
But so it actually is a relatively simple process for them to get, the 2, potentially 3 documents that they need in order to go back home.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the child is born in the US, the child is automatically a US citizen, so the passport's not challenging. If you're in a situation where your surrogate needs to be on the birth certificate for any reason, or if there's only one parent, or if the parent on the birth certificate is not traveling with the child, there's certain extra forms that we need to sign, but we know about all that and we would walk them through all that to make sure they've got what they need so that there's no hiccups.
Fantastic. And then everything else, as you said, could be done kind of at home.
Yeah. And even sometimes parents can travel home before a post-birth order is done if it's a pre-birth and post-birth order state. It just kind of depends on the circumstances. For example, France requires, if you have 2 dads, requires a pre-birth and a post-birth. And so, well, definitely a post-birth in order for the dads to be recognized back home. But they don't need to stick around in the US for that. They can go home on all the documents they get around the time of the birth, and we can finish the post-birth order documents and send those over to them once they're home.
Oh, fantastic. So essentially they'll get multiple birth certificates, but they can use that, the original birth certificate in order to apply for a passport and then go back home. Oh, that makes it so much easier for.
It definitely does. Yeah. We want to get everybody home as quickly as they can so they can get settled, so all their family can meet the baby and do all that. And whatever we can still handle in the United States, we'll take care of and just send to them.
Oh, fantastic. Now, to get to the US, obviously a lot of international intended parents are able to travel here on visitors visas, et cetera. And I know, once again, changing laws, the US has just dropped its COVID testing requirement, but there are still some COVID testing or COVID vaccination rules in order to enter the US. Can you chat to us a little bit about, what kind of entry requirements intended parents need to kind of consider, how long they can stay in the US, anything like that that's ever come up for you?
Yeah. So there's, with COVID specifically, do you mean?
I don't think there's, I guess, in this kind of post-COVID world, because I know, for example, some, I think if you're not a US citizen, you have to be vaccinated in order to enter the US currently, right? Or
you can have a negative test, because there's some people who can't be vaccinated for other reasons. So if you have an exception, I believe that you can get an exception to that. And I'm just so super grateful that there's no more travel ban in place right now.
I know.
What a nightmare that was.
I know. We, having to test my 2-year-old to travel back to the US was, I mean,
not fun.
No, exactly. And the
Mhm.
terror of, oh my gosh, what happens if you're actually positive and you can't get on that flight? And then you're
Yeah.
positive and then,
Yeah, then you've got that to deal with
right.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing parents should do if they're going to be traveling out here for the birth, for
Mhm.
example, is they should definitely talk to the hospital where the birth is going to occur about what the hospital's going to require. Because every hospital has a different set of rules about who's allowed in there, what the vaccination status is, negative COVID tests, wearing masks,
Mhm.
things like that. Will the parents be allowed in the delivery room in this post-COVID world? These are all questions that are going to change hospital to hospital to hospital. So that's something they should research in advance, and their agency can help them with that.
Yeah.
And so that they know what to expect and that they're prepared. Because
Mhm.
if they land and then suddenly the birth happens right away and they're driving right from the airport to the hospital, we don't want them to be stuck out in the parking lot when their baby's being born. We want them to be prepared, have all their things ready to rock and roll so that they can go in there and be there.
And if they require a visa to get to
Mhm.
the US, is having a baby through surrogacy a valid kind of visa
Yeah.
application reason, for
Well,
lack of
so
a better phrase?
yeah, most of the European countries have ESTA visa, which is just basically a visa waiver program where parents can come here. I think it's for 3 months without
Mhm.
any sort of cause or reason to travel. And so they don't need to necessarily give a reason. If the parents are from a country where they are required to give a reason, medical treatment is fine, we're having a baby is fine. Those sorts of things are great and happy occasions. And I can tell you that in practice, when people are at borders and they're holding their babies, I don't have parents who are getting, questions like this, like you can't come through. More often we hear parents are like, and then they stopped and wanted to ask about the baby and how old is he or she and what did you name her? So we tend to see a little more kindness and compassion in practice, even though it can still be terrifying for the parents because they're like, what if, somebody stops us? That's just so uncommon.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, that's good. I'm glad that border officials across the world are usually
Yeah.
nice when
I mean,
babies are
everybody
involved.
likes babies.
Yeah. Who doesn't love a baby?
Yep, exactly.
So I had actually forgotten to ask you a question when we were talking
Oh,
about passports
oh yeah. Okay.
and birth certificates and stuff. You had kind of mentioned it when we were speaking about France, and
Mhm.
particularly if you're a same-sex couple, two
Yeah.
dads, you might have to have multiple birth certificates.
Mhm.
How easy is it if you are not biologically related, whether
Mm.
whether you're in a same-sex couple
Mhm.
or whether you are using donor eggs?
Mhm.
How easy is it for a non-biologically related parent to go on the birth certificate in the
Mhm.
US?
It's pretty easy in the US. The home country is the country where we would need to really work on finessing if it's needed. France does allow two dads to go on, Germany does, the UK does, Spain does. So most countries in Europe are fine with that. And even in Asia, there's countries that will allow that, but you have to be very careful. You have to think about where they are. Sometimes the parents live in a country where they're not citizens. So that's another thing that comes into play because if they're going to be living in and raising the child in a country where the laws are different than the citizenship of the parents, we might need to take that into play so that the child can have healthcare and schooling in that country too. So it's mostly I would focus on the home country, and that's the citizenship country, and then the country of residence of the parents. But in the U.S., it's pretty easy to get whatever you might need, or to put two dads on a birth certificate here.
Okay. That's really good to know, because obviously with a lot of just a lot of the intended parents we see,
Mhm.
depending on circumstances, there might not be that biological relationship. So it's really nice to know that that's an option
Yeah,
for a lot of other intended parents.
Mhm.
So are
It
there
sounds
any?
scary, but it's not as hard as you might think. That's the bottom line. There's definitely states and countries where that's an issue, but for the
Mhm.
most part, it's pretty straightforward and pretty easy.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't
So
mean to cut you off.
no, you're absolutely fine. I mean, so how many intended parents, or I guess I should say, how many countries have you worked with intended parents from,
Oh my gosh.
out of curiosity?
I think it's in the 30s,
Okay.
maybe 40s.
Yeah.
I haven't, so my partner Richard Vaughn, I don't know the last time he and I talked about that was maybe 2 years ago. But we should look into that. My guess is probably 30s or 40s. I mean, it's a lot of parents from the same countries a lot over and over again. So,
and do you see, I mean, obviously the laws in the US are really good. Do you see the laws in other countries changing a lot to kind of reflect new perspectives on surrogacy, and particularly when intended parents are doing surrogacy in places like the US, where everything is so above board and so legally sound?
Yeah.
Have you seen changes recently?
Yes, some good, some bad. It really depends on the country. France is another great example. 5 years ago, France required all same-sex parents, the second dad, so the non-biological father, had to do a step parent adoption procedure essentially in France. And while that's not impossible to do, it just takes time and it costs money and it's a lot of paperwork. But now France has come up with a new procedure. So they've taken steps forward where that's not required anymore. They can do a confirmatory procedure, and it works. So I've seen countries taking slow steps towards getting better. Germany is a great country. It's really easy. The UK is super easy to work with. It's just every now and then you see a country kind of go forward and then come back, and then go forward again a few years later and then drop back just a little bit. So it's part of our job to really keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on in other countries, and to keep up our relationship with attorneys in other countries so we know what's going on and we can help guide them. I can't tell you how many times over the past week I've had attorneys in other countries contacting me about the Roe versus Wade issue.
I'm
Like,
sure.
we have so many cases together, Molly, what are we going to do? And it's like, and I talk them through it so that they can help too. So it's team effort.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, talk about one step forward and two steps back.
Yeah, exactly. Very good full circle there.
But so working with intended parents from so many countries, I mean, you have been asked so many questions, and hear so many concerns from intended parents. What are kind of the most common ones that you tend to hear?
A lot of it is, how do we have the non-biological parent, whether that's a male parent or a female parent, how do we get them recognized in the home country? How do we get to take advantage of schools? How do we get to take advantage of healthcare? What about insurance coverage? That is a huge one for international intended parents, is what happens if things go badly and we don't have insurance coverage? That's a huge one parents ask me about all the time.
Yes.
And that's when I'm like, talk to your wonderful family source consultants agency, because they are going to walk you through talking to a broker, getting plans in place. And depending on where the parents live, there's different options available.
Yeah.
There's options available everywhere, but some of them tend to be a little more expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And do you, what was I going to say? Have you ever, in any of the intended parents that you've worked with, obviously some countries are more challenging than others. Has there ever been a situation where you've just run into so many roadblocks that it's not been possible?
Not really. I've seen everything kind of ultimately work out one way or the other to the satisfaction of the parent. The most challenging case I had, well, I didn't even have to deal with much of it, but it was a single intended mother who used donor egg, donor sperm, and she lived in a country that doesn't even acknowledge surrogacy orders. And she's made it work for her. She's like, look, I knew going into this what it was going to look like. I knew it was going to be a challenge, and I'm doing whatever I can. She's basically having to adopt her child, in the home country, but she's making it work, and she's got a beautiful son. And I tell you, this woman sends me pictures of her with her son. He's like 4 now, every 6 months. And it warms my heart so much, because, and it makes me crazy too, that these home countries aren't more accepting, because this woman was born to parent this child. Like, she is such a good mom. She loves her son so much. And yet this country's making her jump through all these hoops just to be recognized as a parent. So it kind of personally makes me crazy. But she's just like, I want to be a parent, and I love my son, and I don't care what hoops I need to jump through to do it.
But that's amazing. And it's, I mean, it must be so so encouraging for other intended parents, hopefully, as you're watching this, to know that even in a case where, you know, a single parent is not biologically genetically related to, you know, her child in a country that's not accepting, she can still move forward with her journey and make it work and have, you know, her beautiful baby. Like that, that is what, that's what we all want. I mean, I know both of us have come into this industry kind of through different paths, but that's why we're in it, because we want to help people have the beautiful ending and become the parents.
It is the best job in the world.
It's wonderful. I mean, that it's my favorite part, is talking to intended parents and knowing how amazing parents they will be, or in some cases are, and are hoping to continue extending their family. And it's such a privilege to be able to help them do that. And you know, regardless of what legal circumstances, it's so nice to know and have that confidence that you can make it work. That there's always going to be options for you, as long as you have obviously the right attorneys behind you.
For sure. Yeah, that is a big factor.
Yes. But if you're able to, you know, to work with somebody like you to, you know, to make sure it works, then it is possible. And hopefully it gives people hope. So I guess, I mean, is there any other advice that you would give to intended parents or hopeful intended parents about the US legal system, about what they should be kind of looking out for in terms of, or keeping in the back of their head in terms of the legal landscape as they begin this journey or continue in this journey?
Yeah, I think that the US is a great place. It's considered the safest place to do surrogacy. And yes, a certain price comes with that, as opposed to working in a country that's less secure. But you really do get what you pay for as far as that's concerned. I think it's worth it. I think this is not the place you want to try to cut corners as your family creation, right? You want to do this correctly. So I think working with an excellent agency like you and talking to an attorney from the beginning will really just help set you up for success. Don't jump into anything too quickly. Do your research, ask your questions, and then when you make the decision, know that you've made a fully informed decision that you're comfortable with.
Okay. Oh, that's brilliant. Now we've actually just had a question from one of our attendees, if you don't mind answering that.
I'm excited.
And if anybody else who's watching this live does have a question for Molly, would you be open to answering more? Okay, brilliant. That's wonderful. So this question says, we are working in a post-birth state and the insurance we have is suitable for our newborn. Or sorry, the insurance that we have is suitable for our newborn and will be in the name of the non-biologically related parent. We've confirmed that the insurers are fine with this, but how can we prove that the non-biological dad is going to be a parent? Is this something, you know, is this where they produce the contract? You know, how do they prove this, and who should help them prove it?
That's a good question. And I think it's going to depend a little bit upon the specific circumstances. But generally speaking, I suspect that in a post-birth order state, you're going to get that post-birth order within probably 3 days to maybe 2 weeks. And as soon as you get that post-birth order, it should name both parents as the parents, regardless of biology. That's the case in most states, but it might be different in that specific state. I don't know which state this is. And once you have that, that's your proof. And most insurance companies will accept that and make the coverage retroactive. But they can talk to their insurance broker, whoever helped them get that policy, and see if that will be adequate. Definitely talk to their attorney. I think I just brought up the question on the Q&A box, and I saw that they said, will our attorney help with this? Yes. Please talk to your attorney for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see. It doesn't look like we have any other questions at the moment. So I guess, I don't know, we kind of summed it up before, but any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, you know, just one thing I love to let parents know is that this is the most important and most personal thing that they're going to go through in their lives. And they should really listen to their hearts and listen to their instincts. And if something feels good, listen to that. And if something doesn't feel right, selecting an attorney, selection of your doctor, or the selection of the surrogate. If something isn't feeling right, please listen to your hearts and go with a decision that you feel good about. Don't ever feel forced to choose anything in particular or anything specific. This is the most important thing you're going to do, and your team is there to help you get there, no matter how we do that. So
Okay.
let us guide
Great.
you.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, that actually, so we do have two more live questions, which is great. So one of them
Cool.
is kind of what you just said. So one attendee has asked, I realize you might not be able to endorse a service, but how do we find a trustworthy one?
Oh, for the passport expediting service, I think maybe that's the same person asking the two
Oh, potentially.
questions.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, if we can talk about the passport expediting service, but then I guess in terms of not only passport expediting service, but I guess due diligence for any
I mean,
any
there's one in
provider.
particular we work with
Yeah.
all the time, and I am fine personally endorsing them because they saved my bacon. I let my I let my passport lapse, and I was supposed to be traveling to Europe. Yeah, because it was
Molly.
COVID. Yeah, I just wasn't thinking.
Wow, yeah.
And so I called them up, and I'm no joke, they got me my passport updated in like 3 days. These people are amazing. So
That's
I
incredible.
can wholeheartedly say that they're awesome, but it's passport and visa advisors. The guy who runs it is Mark Gilland, and his assistant is named Katie Langdon. They're awesome. And I'd be happy to give you, Jessica, the information. So if anybody on this call wants to contact Jessica, she can give you their info. They're fabulous. There's lots of other good ones too, but I personally have used them to correct my own problems, and they were awesome. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good. And no, that's very helpful, because I'm sure I personally have not done that, but I know a lot of people who have
Yep.
yeah, who have accidentally let their passport lapse. It happens. Yep. But also, as you say, for for your surrogacy, it just definitely helps to get it. I mean, well, I can't speak from experience because my son was born the first week of COVID when the passport services.
Are you kidding me?
Down. Oh no, he was born.
Oh, so you have a lot of fun experience with that.
Oh, I've got yeah.
Wow. So did you get like a special travel pass, or did you just wait it out?
Yes, so for anybody who's watching, I live in England, in the UK, and we eventually had to get a special British passport to bring him back, which arrived on the Friday, and we flew home on the Saturday when he was 13 days old, because it was the second week of COVID, and we didn't
and nobody knew what was happening.
Nobody knew what was happening. Yeah. Oh no, but we had, I mean, we had our lawyers involved, and sadly we did not work with you. But if we did again, we absolutely would. Because we were working with an Illinois lawyer. But we had our Illinois lawyer, our UK lawyer, we had the Congress, we were in contact with the congressperson and the senator from where we were staying in the States. We were in contact with the the British embassy and the consulate, and but it was the first week of COVID, and nobody knew what was going on. So yeah, we were very fortunate, and were able to travel back with him on a special British passport, which they then confiscated at the airport. And it was like a one-time use thing.
I gotta say, I was impressed with a lot of countries, particularly in Europe, who really stepped up to help parents get home during COVID, who said, like, France was like laissez-passer, like, oh, actually a lot of countries were doing that. Germany will sometimes do a kinder passport. They're still doing them now for parents. So there's people really stepped up to the plate to get the parents home with their child or children.
Yeah. And I think, and I know from speaking with a lot of other intended parents, I know for us, our process when we got back in the UK was changed and was all virtual, but I think they're actually continuing a lot of those practices. And I know from speaking to other international intended parents from other countries that a lot of those kind of more simplified practices that were implemented during COVID have sometimes been adopted, which is actually really nice. It's like one of the benefits of a post-COVID world, or
a hidden benefit of going through a pandemic together. Yeah.
There's not many, right? We've gotten another question, which is, as an intended single mother, I probably will leave the father's name blank on the birth certificate application. Can I change it later? And is it easy to change?
That's a good question. It depends on where the parent lives. It also depends on where the surrogacy is taking place and if the court order allows you to change it. If what you're saying is, oh, well, I might meet somebody and get married in the future, that person will likely need to adopt to get it changed. And it may or may not change on the US birth certificate. If we're talking about two countries here, like US and a home country, it might not. Just really, this is such a lawyer answer. It depends. But whoever the attorney is working with that parent can definitely walk them through that. And if it's not too late, like if we're not already done with the court order yet, that can usually be written into a court order if there is a second parent coming in. But if not, if there isn't somebody in sight already, we might need to talk about adoption.
But it is okay to leave it blank.
Oh yeah. Well, it depends on the home country, but in the US, that's not a problem. I see that they've posted again, or the sperm donor. No, sperm donor is a donor. So I would not recommend that, to be honest, but talk to your attorney about it for sure. Yeah.
And then I don't know if you've seen this question as well about an escrow account. So the specific question is, how do you fund an escrow account with a favorable exchange rate? In answering that, would you also just be able to talk a little bit about escrow accounts and what their purpose are in a surrogacy journey?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the whole point of the escrow accounts actually started because there was a lot of agencies in California that were popping up, and they were just not doing things by the book, and they were taking money from intended parents and shutting down and basically stealing that money. And so the state of California made it part of their law that says no more. Now agencies can't hold money, and it has to go into a separate escrow account, either an attorney run account or a licensed and bonded escrow company. So it was put into place to do that, to protect the parents and to have a second trusted provider kind of looking at things. This is not the rule in every state though. So this is just specific to California, and I think there's a few other states that require it. It is considered best practice in the industry though, to have the money set aside. Funding escrow, there's lots of good escrow companies. I would say maybe 60 or 70% of attorneys will hold the trust account too, if you ask them to. I know at our firm, we have an entire department that just kind of handles that, which is nice, but some attorneys don't want to touch it. So just talk to your attorney about whether that's something they'll do or not. But there's lots of good escrow companies out there too. So interview a couple different ones. And as far as a favorable exchange rate goes, just kind of watching the exchange rates. I think the exchange rate is probably going to tank pretty soon in the United States, because I think we're kind of going into a bit of a recession. And so parents might be more inclined to put some money over here now. I was just talking to some parents this morning who are like, look, we'd really like to get the money over there, just let it sit while we were getting our egg donor arranged, while we're getting the surrogate arranged. And I'm like, that's totally fine. If you would like to send it, we will hold it and just keep our eyes on it until you're ready to proceed. But exchange rates are what they are. There's not a whole lot we can do about them, sadly.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I wish. Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Molly. Let's see, unless anybody else has another question, which if you do, pop it up now. But otherwise, thank you. Thank you everybody for joining us. And Molly, thank you so much.
Thanks for all the good questions, both from you, Jessica, and the audience. These are fun.
No, it has been such a pleasure talking to you, as always. I love you are just such a font of knowledge and expertise, but I love how willing you are to share it, and in such a way that that it's just easily understandable for those of us who are not immersed in the legal practice of surrogacy and egg donation day to day.
I'm happy to share my love of this with everybody.
So yes, thank you so much. And yeah, I hope everybody who's watching this live or is watching it afterwards has learned something, has had your questions answered. But I know that I'm very happy. If anybody has any questions about surrogacy further, please feel free to contact me at Family Source Consultants. Molly, are you very happy for people to get in contact with you if they have any further questions as well?
They can get
Okay,
my
brilliant.
info through you or directly through our website. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Molly. Enjoy the rest of your day. I hope the sun continues to shine
Yep.
out there in
Me
California.
too. Awesome.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.